Hi, and welcome to this week's Freedom Phrase. Freedom phrases are a few words I string together to help you think differently, more expansively, more generatively, to shift your perspective, and to ultimately have you feeling more peaceful. This week's Freedom Phrase was actually inspired by a podcast I was listening to this morning. It's called The Unmistakable Creative, hosted by Srini Rao. And if you haven't listened to his podcast, I would highly recommend it. It's probably one of my favorites. He's got great guests. And this morning, the topic was actually end of life. And, when you think about end of life, when I think about end of life, I'm mindful that we no longer have, yesterday or even the last moment or even the, last hour. So we're constantly ending. And the guest had asked, how well do you do endings, and what do you think about your endings? And so this week's Freedom Phrase is a question that was inspired by, well, although it was inspired by end of life, I think about how can I apply it in my day-to-day. So here's the question. Have I loved well? Have I loved well? Ask yourself that. Have I loved well? And what that means is not in my life in its entirety, but in that last conversation I just had, in the way I'm talking to myself, in the way I'm relating to my job, in the way I'm relating to my, my company, my children, my, friends and family, my associates. Have I loved well? Because if I think about using that as the sort of the way into a conversation, I personally want to know at the end of my conversation, at the end of my day, I have loved well. So I begin with that and say, have I loved well? I want to, so I better be loving. I want to be loving in this conversation, loving to myself and loving to you. And I promise, using that question for yourself, have I loved well, will change and enhance each of your relationships, especially the one with yourself. It'll change all of your experiences because loving well is very generative, right? It is very expansive. And loving well can also, not always mean that you are saying yes to everything and being so magnanimous with your time or your effort. No, it could also mean saying no. It might mean the most loving thing I can do right now is say no so that I can have some time for myself, or saying no so that I don't perpetuate this, this habit or pattern we've gotten into in our relationship. So, have I loved well? Ask yourself that at the end of these conversations you're having during the day, and at the end of the day before you rest your head for the evening. Have I loved well? If there's anyone that you know of that would benefit from this freedom phrase, please share it with them. It would be a loving thing to do. And love is the way, get in the way. I will see you here again next week.